The palace was silent, but her heart was not. Behind walls of marble and gold, an Ottoman princess stood before a mirror taller than any man she would ever be allowed to choose. Silk layers weighed heavily on her shoulders. Pearls stitched into crimson fabric pressed against her skin like chains disguised as beauty. Outside her chamber, court musicians played softly, but to her ears, every note sounded like a countdown. This was her wedding night. For most women, a wedding night promised intimacy, hope, or love. For an Ottoman princess, it often meant fear. Ottoman princesses were not raised to dream of romance. From childhood, they were trained to understand one brutal truth: their bodies, marriages, and futures belonged to the empire. A princess was not a daughter first, she was a political instrument. Unlike European royal brides who married foreign kings, Ottoman princesses were usually married to powerful men inside the empire, grand viziers, generals, or high-ranking statesmen. These marriages were not rewards. They were leashes. By marrying a princess, a man was bound tightly to the sultan. If he rebelled, the marriage would destroy him. If he failed, he could be executed, sometimes while still married to the sultan's daughter. The princess knew this. And she knew something worse. She could never escape. Divorce was technically possible, but rare and dangerous. A princess could request separation, but doing so humiliated her husband, and humiliated men in power were unpredictable. Some husbands responded with cruelty, isolation, or silent resentment. Others feared the princess herself, knowing she carried the blood of the sultan and could destroy them with a single word. So the wedding night was not just personal, it was political. The princess had likely met her husband only once or twice. Sometimes not at all. She may have been a teenager, he, decades older. He may have been a war hero, or a man who climbed the court through cunning and blood. She had no right to refuse. As servants prepared her for the night, bathing her, perfuming her hair, adjusting her veil, the princess remained quiet. Silence was her armor. She had learned long ago that questions were dangerous. No one explained what would happen after the door closed. Ottoman palace culture treated royal women as precious, but also controlled. Princesses lived surrounded by servants, eunuchs, and tutors. They were protected from the outside world, yet trapped within it. Many had never been alone with a man in their lives before their wedding night. Fear grew in the absence of knowledge. Stories traveled through whispers in the harem, stories of harsh husbands, of cold nights, of women who disappeared into distant estates, never seen again. Stories of princesses whose husbands were executed, leaving them widowed and exiled before they turned 30. A princess did not just fear her husband. She feared what he represented. If he succeeded politically, she would be trapped in his shadow. If he failed, she would be punished by association. Either way, her life would no longer belong to her. The wedding night symbolized this loss. When the door finally closed behind the groom, the palace etiquette demanded dignity. No screams. No resistance. A princess was expected to endure with grace, even if her heart was breaking. Even if fear hollowed her chest. Some grooms entered the chamber nervous themselves. They knew that touching the sultan's daughter was dangerous. One mistake, one insult, one complaint, and their lives could end. This fear sometimes made them distant, awkward, or cruel. Others abused their power, knowing the princess could not easily accuse them. The imbalance was absolute. After the wedding, the princess would be moved out of the imperial palace into her husband's residence. For the first time in her life, she would live away from her mother, sisters, and the familiar rhythms of the harem. Isolation followed marriage. Many princesses described this transition as worse than the wedding night itself. But the terror began there. The wedding night was the moment when fantasy died, when silk became stone, and ceremony turned into reality. It was the night she understood that being born royal did not mean being free. As candles flickered low and footsteps approached, the princess steadied her breath. She had survived palace intrigues, rival concubines, and silent expectations her entire life. Now she would survive this. Not because she wanted to, but because survival was what Ottoman princesses were trained to do. And yet, for many, what followed the wedding night proved even more frightening. Mourning did not bring relief. When the sun rose after the wedding night, the princess woke to a new reality, one where her status had changed, but her freedom had not improved. In fact, it often shrank. She was now a wife, not a daughter of the palace. Ottoman princesses carried immense symbolic power, but little personal control. Their marriages were designed to neutralize ambitious men. A husband married to a princess could never claim the throne. His loyalty was assumed, but also constantly tested. This made married life tense, fragile, and dangerous. Some husbands treated their royal wives with respect, even fear. Others resented them deeply. Imagine living with someone who represented both privilege and threat, someone who could ruin you simply by writing a letter to her father. For the princess, this meant silence became her survival tool. Complaining too much could provoke punishment. Complaining too little could invite neglect or isolation. Many princesses lived in emotional exile, surrounded by servants but starved of affection. If a husband was executed or disgraced, the princess paid the price. She might be sent away to a distant palace, stripped of influence, forbidden from remarrying. Widowhood for an Ottoman princess was not a return to freedom, it was often a permanent sentence of loneliness. Some princesses outlived multiple husbands, watching men rise and fall like seasons, while they remained frozen in ceremonial roles. Their lives were long, but narrow. The fear of the wedding night lingered because it marked the beginning of this endless uncertainty. Unlike concubines who could rise through favor, or ordinary women who could build family lives, Ottoman princesses existed in a paradox. They were too important to ignore, and too dangerous to trust. Even motherhood was complicated. A princess's sons did not inherit the throne. Daughters inherited the same fate. Many princesses watched their children become political pawns just as they had been. So why did they fear the wedding night so deeply? Because it was the moment when illusion ended. Before marriage, a princess lived in a gilded cage, protected by rank and ritual. After marriage, she entered a world where rank no longer guaranteed safety. Some princesses found ways to reclaim power. They built networks of influence, funded charities, commissioned mosques, and used wealth to shape politics quietly. A few became formidable figures behind the scenes, feared even by men who outranked them. But this power came at a cost. They learned to hide emotions, suppress desires, and perform loyalty flawlessly. Love, when it appeared, was often accidental and dangerous. Many princesses chose not to love at all. The wedding night symbolized this transformation, from girl to instrument, from daughter to shield, from human to symbol. It was not the physical act that terrified them. It was what the act represented. A door closing on childhood. A future chosen by others. A life lived carefully, quietly, and under constant watch. History often remembers Ottoman princesses as elegant figures in miniature paintings, calm, distant, untouchable. But behind those painted eyes were women who understood power better than most men ever would. They feared their wedding night because they understood something deeply unsettling. Royalty did not protect women, it consumed them. And in the Ottoman Empire, survival was the only true victory a princess could hope for.